I am the current director of the Santa Barbara Mission Archive Library, and I'm only the second non-friar to hold that position. Historically, that's been held by a friar. So, what's in the name? Our name is the Santa Barbara Mission Archive Library, which confuses everyone. They think we're the archive of the Santa Barbara Mission. Makes sense, but we're not. We're more than that. We're actually the archive of the province of St. Barbara's missions, or even before the province of St. Barbara existed, the Franciscan missions of the West. Our collection dates primarily from the founding of the California missions in California and goes up through beyond that time frame. Let me move out of the way so you can see Father Maynard. Father Maynard Geiger is pictured there in what was originally our archive, one room. We're now thankfully a little bigger than that, thanks to him. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we have there and then show you mainly some pictures of some of the things we have, because a lot of people don't understand the scope of our collection, or sometimes don't even know we're at Old Mission Santa Barbara. We ended up with a very vast collection of materials of the Franciscan missions of the West. Why did we end up with so much material? Well, mainly because Old Mission Santa Barbara was the only California mission that wasn't secularized, that did not close during the secularization period in the 19th century. And so much of the material from the various California missions ended up in Santa Barbara. Documents, books, art, artifacts. Not everything did, as we all know. Things still show up on the market for sale, unfortunately. But a good deal of material came. And also, the archive library tried to reacquire a lot of material over the years. And so that's why we ended up with the collection we have, which is actually quite large. Another reason why we have such a large collection is that we had friars over the years that collected material, like Maynard Geiger, like Zephyrin Engelhardt, who, in doing their own research on the missions, would travel around the world, literally, looking for documents, other resources that might shed light on what was going on in California. And as the Serra cause also grew in the 20th century, who tried to find information on documents related to St. Junipero Serra's work in California, northern Mexico, and even in Spain. And so in the days before digitization, right, they would hand transcribe these documents they found. And so some of our collection are original documents. Some are these hand transcriptions in Father Maynard's handwriting, which we can all recognize when we see it, or our old kind of thermofax copies, which are quickly fading and we have to digitize, or even photographs of documents. And so we have this hybrid kind of collection of documents, thanks in large part to these friars. Also, we have parts of our collection that I'll talk about a little later that are more recent additions to our collection, thanks again to friars who were provincials at the time, in this case, Father Joe Canici, who made sure materials were brought to the archive library and were not lost. So this is why we have this very vast collection. Now, so the archive library has two birthdays, I like to say. The first birthday is when the Old Mission was founded, because documentation began then, and they kept their records at that mission. But it began its second life, its second birthday, in 1967/68. In 1967, we became an official nonprofit, a separate historical and educational institution. We're still very much affiliated with the province of St. Barbara, with the Franciscan Friars. In fact, the corporation, the members of the corporation are the definitors. And so we have a board of trustees that does the governance, the day-to-day governance, and we report back to the definitorium all the time to make sure we're doing things in accordance with their wishes as well. And as I mentioned, we had friar archivists for a long time. Maynard Geiger came to Old Mission Santa Barbara. He actually went to seminary there, but went off and got his degrees. And when he finished his degree, PhD in history, returned to Santa Barbara and became historian archivist at the archive there, working in one room like this I still don't know how he managed to do all he did. He did a tremendous job organizing the main collections in the archive library, writing brief descriptions of every document in those 5 major collections in the finding guides, and publishing all the time. You know, my staff always tells me it's because he was living there 24/7 and he could do it, but I still don't know how he managed to do it. But he was a tremendous asset, and he was there for 40 years, for the next 40 years, until he passed away. And it's thanks to Father Maynard that we actually have the archive library that we do now, that it is a separate nonprofit. It was his dream to always have a state-of-the-art archive, and he is the one who is behind, with his you know, enthusiastic supporters, who raised the funds to build a whole new wing that was somehow, and I don't know how he managed to do this, approved to get fused to the old mission, which was already a national landmark at that point. So I don't know how he managed to do that, but thank goodness he did. So we look like we're part of the mission. We look like we've always been there, but our wing has only been there since 1967-68, when construction was completed. So we are a separate nonprofit, so we do rely on membership, we rely on donations, we rely on grants to operate. Now, in the days when you had a friar archivist, that actually was okay, because, you know, you work for cheap, yeah. But we don't have that anymore, and so we do, as all nonprofits do, constantly struggle to make ends meet, and to not have our budget constraints limit our vision and our program, but rather to have our vision and our program help us raise the money that we need to make it happen. So
you can make a donation.
Yeah. Well, you know, I had this semi-embarrassing moment last night where I reintroduced myself to our key speaker. He goes, "Oh, I recognize your face from the California Mission Studies Conference a couple of years ago, and you were talking to my wife, and you said, oh, sure, you can come look at my collection anytime. You just have to become a member first." That's me, folks. That's me. So, yeah, there's always the membership appeal in there. Okay, so what do? Well, we're actually in a transition point in our life, but right now, what we do is we collect and conserve and make accessible, we hope, cultural material resources for the study of Franciscan missions and Native peoples in the Americas, really, primarily the West, but we do have material that is beyond that scope. And so we are in a transition point where we realize now our actual holdings are beyond our official scope, and so we are re-envisioning ourselves at this moment. So, and it's a very exciting time. So what do we have? Well, the bulk of our collection is related to the California missions, and we have 5 major document collections, and these are the ones that Father Maynard organized and made finding guides for, and these finding guides are available on our website for researchers to search through, and then they can either come to the archive. If they're a member, they can become a member, they can come to the archive and do research, or they can request documents through email or whatever, and we can send copies, either hard copies or digital copies, for a fee. And the main collections are the Junipero Serra collection, which is focused on St. Junipero Serra's work in Mallorca, in northern Mexico, and in California, and in Baja as well, I should say, Alta and Baja California. And so this dates through his work. It ends pretty much with his death, and then we begin with the California Mission Documents California Mission Documents collection, which I'm thinking, is that this that's making noise? Can I turn that off? Oh, no, I don't know if you can turn this off, because I think that's what's screeching. And this covers the correspondence, a lot of the communication between missions and New Spain, between the political and civil authorities in the mission, so there's a great deal of correspondence going on there, and we can get to know what's going on in Alta California. Then Santa Barbara Mission becomes the home, briefly, of an apostolic college in the late 19th century. And so we have that collection as well. But we also have the De la Guerra and the De la Guerra Vallejo collection. And the De la Guerra family was a very prominent family in not just Santa Barbara, but in California. And so we have generations of correspondence among these very prominent California members of this very prominent California family. And the reason we ended up with it is because one of the De la Guerra descendants was a Franciscan. And when he passed away, he left it, thankfully, to us. So we have that collection. And it really does shed a lot of light on what's going on in California at the time. But that's only part of what we have. I can honestly say we have a good part of our collection which we still need to inventory and for which we still need to make finding guides. And the only reason I know we have a lot more is because I moved it. Although I don't have such a fancy facility as Kathy does now, we did get new shelving, and so I had to pack everything up and put it back in. So I know that we have a lot of things that we still need to create finding guides for or inventories for so that we can make them more accessible. And this is one of the challenges we face as well. But just in these 5 major document collections, we have over 75,000 pages of documents. But we add that to that, we have the interrogatories, or the preguntas y respuestas, which is a series of questions sent to the missions, the 21 missions in the early 19th century, asking a series of questions like, how long is the workday? What do you feed the Indians? What do they wear? How often do they get new clothes? Do they get to leave? These kinds of questions. And all the missions responded, and we have those as well. So it's a huge treasure trove of information for what's going on in the missions in the early 19th century. And we have biannual and annual reports, which are also really important. But we also have books. When I open up the shelves to visitors and show them rows and rows of these books is when I get the real reaction. But we have over 4,000 titles of the books that used to be housed at the California missions, at the 21 missions. It's a wide variety of topics, languages, even materials the books are made of. You can see some are vellum or leather, others are wood pulp. And this gives us some idea as to what the friars were reading, what they had as a reference. You know, in their minds, they're creating communities where there's no Google, right? So how do you know how to deliver a baby? Well, you need a medical book. And so they had those. Architecture, agriculture, just history. A wide variety of things. I have people, professors from the classics department who come because they want to know that they're reading Virgil, that they're reading all these things. And so we have a lot of people who come just to know what ideas the friars were familiar with. We also have, oh, sorry, I'm totally a Mac person, so I get confused when I go PC. We also have a reference library, and we have over 11,000 reference titles, books that were published from the late 19th century on. Anything related to the study of Franciscan history, Franciscan missions, art, architecture, the native peoples, anthropology, archaeology, you name it. We try to collect it, and we've been collecting it for many years. We still buy whatever's published this year that we think will be useful to researchers as reference materials. We will purchase and add to our reference library. This, in some cases, what people come to look at, not the primary but the secondary sources, especially if they're looking at how mission history was interpreted in the early 20th century as opposed to how we do it now. And some of these volumes are very hard to come by. They're very rare. We also have copies of the sacramental registers for all 21 California missions. We have some originals, but those aren't browsed. Those are kept in the vault. We have copies of all the registers that we can possibly have at this point. But they go up to the 1840s for most, which covers secularization for most of the missions. But the Central Coast, we actually have registers that go through the late 19th century and sometimes even the early 20th century. We also have copies of censuses and padrones, so people can actually use these as well. People use these for demographic studies, but we also have a fair number of people who are reconstructing their family tree, and they come in to use these, either for their own family's information, but also sometimes to prove membership in a tribe. Oh, let me go back one before I go here. In this here, we have one of our original registers, and this is actually the burial register for what was supposed to be the Presidio Chapel, the Santa Barbara Presidio Chapel, and Old Mission Santa Barbara. Then it was prepared by Junipero Serra, but at the last moment, the governor of California denies Serra the establishment of Santa Barbara Mission, and that wouldn't be established until after his death. And so there is a front page where we have mission crossed out, and it tells this wonderful story of the conflicts between often Franciscans and the authorities as to what should or should not be done. This brings us to this slide, which is actually, this is Serra's signature at the end of that page, and you can see where he says Presidente. Beautiful handwriting. I love seeing his. I never thought I'd grow up and get to see Junipero Serra's handwriting in person, but I get to. And you can tell when it's his writing right away. We also have the largest collection of Serra-related material, not just because we have the Junipero Serra collection of documents related to his work in Majorca and Mexico and in the Californias, but also because we're the home of the Serra cause. So we have the files related to the efforts in the 20th and 21st century to have them canonized. So we have files related to that process as well as the supporting materials for the case of his canonization. We also have the official portrait that's in my office. So, the original was lost during the Mexican Revolution, but prior to its loss, there were 2 copies made. One is here and one is still in Mexico. One is here, I say, but one is in Santa Barbara. This is also, this is also in my office. We do have a very small art collection, but I like to say significant art collection. This is one of the earliest known paintings, actually the earliest known paintings of California missions. And I always feel a little self-conscious saying that to people who come from areas where they have older European history than we do. But this is dated about 1832. We don't have a precise date. Sometimes it's as early as the 1820s, but this is Mission San Gabriel. It's one of our most requested images. It's used often in California history textbooks, but also U.S. history textbooks, because it shows the whole mission enterprise in one image. You have the indigenous population and their traditional housing in the foreground, as well as the friar. You have the mission. You have a procession either going in or coming out of the house. You have the church. You have the animals that are associated with the Europeans coming and bringing those with them. And so it is often used to illustrate those elements of mission life. We also have a series of California mission paintings by Edwin Deacon, who was a British-born artist, moved to the Midwest and then eventually to the Bay Area, and made his career painting the California missions. These are a series of 21 paintings of the California missions in oil. And in 1898-99, he embarked on making 3 complete series, 2 in oil, 1 in watercolor. And in the 1950s, this series was donated to the Friars. And so we take care of this collection for the Friars. What's significant about this, and we talked about different kinds of archives and how archaeology is a different kind of archive. And in many ways, paintings are also a different kind of archives, art and other materials. This tells us what happened after secularization. It's artists like Deacon and others who tell us of the impact of secularization. And if you were in my conference room looking at this, you would see that most of these, 20 of these buildings are in disarray, are in very poor shape. That's because nobody cared about these missions as buildings after secularization. What they cared about was the land they were on, and that was sold, and that was what really was an integral part of the growth of the rancho economy in California in the 19th century. And it was artists like Deacon and others, when Californians saw what was happening to this part of their history, and it was disintegrating because there were sandstone and adobe churches, you get a revival in the late 19th and early 20th century in interest in conserving and, in some cases, rebuilding these missions, sometimes poorly, sometimes well. But this is what also is a document of the process of secularization and what happens in California in the late 19th century. But we also have a very large photo image collection. In fact, we don't even know how many we have. It's so large. And they date from the 1860s, not just of missions, but of a lot of things. We can look at the transformations in the West through this photo collection. Some of these were collected as resource materials, research materials. Others, friars just like to take pictures, we found. And so sometimes that's what they did. We talk about finding treasures. This was a treasure we found in the basement. This is an 1870 print by Carlton Watkins of Old Mission Santa Barbara. It's not, we spiffed it up a bit for this presentation, but it's actually got a lot of foxing on it because we found it in a cupboard in the basement. We had storage for the archive down there for mostly maps. And showing this to John Johnson, who's the director of anthropology at the Santa Barbara Natural History Museum, he's on our board, and he looked at this and he goes, you know, this is probably the oldest photo we have of Shumash at the mission, and maybe, who knows, ever. But this is an 1870 print, and he believes he can even identify these women. And if anybody can, it's John. So, you know, you never know where you're going to find a treasure. So here just a couple of, this is Mission San Antonio, give you an idea of what was going on there. But we also have a large glass plate negative collection. This is one of them. This is, if you're familiar with Santa Barbara, this is Santa Barbara, one street, really a one street and probably a one-horse town at the time. But if you see Santa Barbara now, it looks nothing like this. It's all, you know, white, fake late Spanish colonial. Now it's all white stucco and red tile roofs. But this is what it looked like, and this is what that same location looks like now. So we can get a sense of what. So Franciscan archives don't just tell us about Franciscans, right? They tell us about a bigger picture of the world.
Where is San Antonio?
No, we don't have San Antonio mission stuff.
Just alone in the middle of.
Oh, you mean Mission San Antonio?
Yeah.
No, that's Central Coast. Just if you're familiar with Paso Robles, or I'm trying to think of nearby areas.
North of San Miguel.
There we go, north of San Miguel Mission, but that's like, it's about, what, 2-3 hours north of Santa Barbara, so it's northern central coast of California. Yeah, so that's, yeah, nearby. So there's San Miguel, San Luis Obispo, and San Antonio.
It's in the middle of a military reservation.
It is. And it's actually, if you go there now, it probably gives you more of a sense of what it was probably like back in the mission era, because there's very little around it, and you're out in the middle of nowhere because of this military base. It's so you get this sense of mission life in early California. This also helps, we have records that also help with documenting life beyond the mission era in California and in Santa Barbara. This is Old Mission Santa Barbara after the 1925 earthquake. You can see it was devastating. It actually leveled much of Santa Barbara, which is why we had the opportunity to rebuild and look like we do now, which is this late Spanish colonial style. But we have documentation, not just the plans and the engineering reports, but we have photographs that show us the reconstruction effort, not just in the 20s, but again in the 50s, when it had to be redone because the materials they used to reconstruct did not last. So it's painstakingly torn apart and rebuilt again. And even the more recent renovation, which Father Richard McManus was behind, we had a Save America's Treasures grant that helped conserve the convento, the facade of this church, and the crypt under the altar. And also, if I go back, you can see there's this cross design in the window, but it was our archive. If I go back to this one, we did a blow-up detail of this window, and it showed a rosette pattern. So that's been restored. So the archive is very useful on a lot of levels. As I try to speed through here. We also have a significant mission music collection. And this is an antiphonarium that was actually used, made in 1774. It's giant. These are vellum sheets. It was used in the Apostolic College in Mexico City, which is where the Franciscans trained and then went off to missions. This came to Santa Barbara Mission in the 1880s. And this is part of the Duran Choir Book. And music, as we know, is an important part of church life, but also evangelization. It's it's a place where people can meet, is through music. What's really wonderful about this is that there are a few things going on here. Not only do we learn about mission music, which is really important, but also the pages, as you can see, are coming apart. And what we found is that these pages of music were glued onto a map book, a book of Mediterranean maps. And so, paper is hard to come by. You're going to repurpose a book that you're not going to use again. You're not going to go back and navigate the Mediterranean, so you might as well glue that together. But I can't let researchers look at this anymore because it's so fragile. But what we can do, this is my phone, so don't gauge it on this, but we have digitized these. And that is one thing we're doing more and more as our funding and technology allows, is that we're digitizing as much of the collection as we can, not just for conservation, which is an important part. We had a fire, we're in fire zones, so we had to evacuate the mission a few years back. And if heaven forbid that place should go, we have that information digitized, right, or a good portion of it. But it also allows us to put this on a computer in the reading room, big screen, a little smaller than this, and music students can come in and view these pages and not do any additional harm to the original. We also have a map collection. So this is one of our pieces. This was the map used in Pilot's diary of Sarah, or autobiography, or biography of Sarah. This is a survey map of California done in 1848, overseen by John C. Fremont. It was actually used in the Constitutional Convention in California of 1848. We became a state in 1850. And so there are actually pencil marks where at that convention they were designated the counties of this new state of California. But we have a lot more. We have collections from scholars who studied the missions in the 20th century. Norman Neuberg, who was very involved in mission restoration, he bequeathed to us all his research materials, photographs, notes, you name it, we've got it. We're still processing it. We have the archaeological work of Edith Buckland Webb. And her husband, Hugh Pascal, who was a photographer, beautiful records of the work they did. Kurt Baer, who specialized in art history. Smiley was the El Camino Real. We have Robert Hoover and his archaeological collection. And Inez Hazy and her work on the Russians in California. But we're not just California. Thanks to Father Joe Kenichi, we also have a significant collection of material from the Franciscan missions in Arizona among the Tohono O'odham. We're still processing that. Thanks to the Academy of American Franciscan History, we have a grant to go through boxes and boxes of documents and photographs and not only house them properly, but create finding guides to help make this accessible to researchers. It really is a treasure trove. It's from about 1900 to the 1960s. Huge collection of photo images of a wide variety of people and subject matter waiting to be explored. A lot of correspondence. Bonaventure O. Blosser was involved in getting the reservation recognized, and so we have a lot of that correspondence as well, but we have school records, we have all kinds of things that would, it's just a treasure trove for a lot of research to be done that we're trying to make accessible. And so we get used a lot for a lot of different kinds of projects. The recent biography on Junipero Serra by Robert Sankowitz and Rosemary Beebe was based hugely on our document collection on Serra. We supplied them with tons of copies of documents for their research. We often have the media come, especially during the issue of canonization. But we also, and there was an exhibit at the Huntington Library a couple of years on Serra and its legacy. We had about 25 items from our collection in that exhibit. And of course, we continue to try to promote the exploration of Franciscan mission history, and we issue our own publications as part of that effort as well. So this is pretty much, in a nutshell, what we have in our collection and what we try to do to make it accessible. So, thank you.